she stepped off the school bus just a few hundred feet from home. A child carrying books, dreams, and innocence. The sun was still out. Her neighborhood was quiet, safe, familiar. But by nightfall, 9-year-old Angie Housman had vanished into thin air, and what followed would become one of Missouri's most chilling, heartbreaking mysteries. It was November 18th, 1993, the kind of crisp autumn afternoon when kids laughed their way home from school and leaves crunched beneath hurried feet. In the quiet suburb of St. and Missouri, the day had been uneventful, normal, but for one family, this day would mark the end of everything that ever felt safe. 9-year-old Angie Marie Housman was a fourth grader at Boer Elementary. Kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and eager to make friends, Angie was the type of child everyone described as sweet to the core. She loved animals, dreamed of being a teacher, and still believed in fairy tales. Her school was just over a mile away, and like most days, she rode the yellow school bus home. Her bus stop wasn't far, just a few hundred yards from her house. A walk she had taken dozens of times before. A walk watched over by neighbors peeking through kitchen windows. A walk so routine, no one ever thought to worry. Until that day, the bus dropped Angie off at around 3 p.m. She walked a short stretch with neighborhood kids, as usual, but they peeled off one by one. And soon, she was alone, less than a block from home. And then, she was gone. No one saw her taken. No one heard her scream. Angie Housman had simply vanished. At first, her mother and stepfather, Ronald, weren't too concerned. Angie had a habit of lingering to chat with friends. Maybe she stopped to pet a neighbor's dog or wandered off to show someone her drawings. But as the minutes turned to an hour, panic began to set in. They canvassed the route to the bus stop. Neighbors joined in. Children were questioned. Had anyone seen her? Did she say where she was going? Yes, she got off the bus. Yes, she started walking home. But then nothing. The parents, who often watched from their windows, both were busy that day. No one had eyes on Angie. By nightfall, the search expanded. Flashlights cut through darkness. Shouts echoed down quiet streets. Her name, called again and again, received no answer. And then came the call to the police. The officers responded immediately. Angie wasn't the kind of child to run off, and temperatures were dropping quickly. There was no sign she had simply wandered away. And then, something far more disturbing emerged. 10 days earlier, just a few miles away, an 11-year-old girl had been nearly abducted after stepping off her school bus. A man had tried to drag her into the woods, but she fought back and escaped. The predator was still out there, uncaught, unknown. Now the fear was real. Had the same man taken Angie? At this point, I want you to imagine this. You're a parent. Your child is walking home from the bus stop, just yards from safety, and then they're gone. No witness. No evidence, just an eerie silence that swallows up everything you love. That's what Angie's family lived through. And what came next was even darker than anyone could have feared. Stay with me as we uncover the lies, the overlooked suspects, and the long-awaited break in a case that haunted a community for decades. If you believe every child deserves justice, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more true crime stories, and share Angie's story. Her voice was stolen, but you can help make sure it's never forgotten. The morning after Angie disappeared, Saint and awoke, with unease hanging heavy in the air. Police wasted no time. This wasn't a case of a runaway. Angie was only 9. It was cold outside, and she'd vanished from a well-populated area in broad daylight. Something didn't add up. Within hours, they launched an intensive search. Canine units were brought in. The dogs picked up Angie's scent at the bus stop. It followed the expected route, past hedges, down the sidewalk toward her street. And then halfway to her house, the scent stopped. Just like that. No trail. No struggle. No belongings left behind. The implication was terrifying. Angie hadn't wandered off. She'd been taken. Police scoured the area. Officers searched nearby woods and parks. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew overhead. Divers were sent to search creeks and drains. Neighbors were questioned. Doorbells rang up and down the block. Still nothing. It was as though Angie had evaporated into the air. Then a chilling possibility resurfaced: that attempted abduction 10 days earlier. The girl who survived described a man in a blue sedan. Mid-30s, average build, scruffy beard. He'd grabbed her as she walked home and tried to drag her into the woods. Only her screams and the presence of nearby neighbors forced him to flee. That attacker had never been caught. Could he have returned? One resident reported seeing a blue car cruising slowly through the neighborhood around the time Angie vanished. The driver didn't appear to live there, and his presence didn't feel right. Something about the way he moved, like he was hunting. Investigators created a composite sketch based on this sighting and the earlier assault. They printed thousands of flyers. The image hit TV screens across the state, but no one recognized the man. Tips flooded in, over 300 in the first 24 hours alone. It overwhelmed the department. More than 20 additional officers were reassigned to the case just to handle the leads. But none of them led to Angie. Meanwhile, suspicion began creeping closer to home. Investigators always start with the inner circle: family, neighbors, friends. Angie's stepfather, Ronald, was questioned. He denied any involvement, agreed to a polygraph, opened his home to investigators. He insisted, "I would never hurt her." The polygraph came back inconclusive, but not incriminating. Next, they located Angie's biological father, a man she had never met. He had left the family before she was born. But Angie's mother recalled something disturbing. He had been seen slowly driving past their house multiple times. Just watching. Creepy? Yes. Criminal? Maybe. But he had an alibi. Airtight. And just like that, the leads thinned. The FBI joined the investigation on day 3. With no ransom note, no sightings, and no evidence of Angie running away, federal agents knew one thing: this was an abduction, and time was running out. Each day that passed made the odds of finding Angie alive dwindle. Then, something strange emerged. A teacher came forward. Just days before she vanished, Angie had mentioned a nature trip with her uncle. But her family said she didn't have an uncle. Who was she talking about? Did she trust this person? Was this her abductor? The FBI dug deep. Interviews, background checks, a search through known offenders in the area. But nothing matched. The mysterious uncle vanished into smoke. By now, fear had gripped the community. Children were no longer allowed to walk alone. Parents waited at bus stops. Windows, once used to casually watch over the neighborhood, now served as barriers, tightly closed and locked. Still, no answers came. She was right there, just a few houses away. How does a 9-year-old girl vanish in that final stretch? The truth was coming, but no one was ready for how dark it would be. Stay with me. In the next chapter, the story takes a horrifying turn, a discovery in the woods that changes everything. If you're drawn to uncovering the truth and giving voice to the voiceless, make sure you're subscribed. Angie's story isn't just a case, it's a call to just 9 days. That's how long Angie Housman was missing. 9 days of fear, of silence, of a city holding its breath. And then, on November 27th, 1993, everything changed. A hunter was walking through the Bush Wildlife Conservation Area, a sprawling 7,000-acre forest preserve about 30 miles west of St. Louis. It was early afternoon, cold and still. The kind of place where you hear every crack of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush. That's when he saw it. At first, it didn't register. His mind tried to deny what he was looking at. But there, tied to a tree, was a small, naked body. The police were called immediately. What they found was almost beyond comprehension. The girl was bound to the tree by handcuffs. Her head was completely wrapped in duct tape, leaving only a small gap around her nose so she could breathe. Her body was covered in bruises, her wrists and ankles torn from days of struggle. And inside her mouth was a piece of her own underwear used as a gag. She had no clothing on. Next to the scene was a plastic bag. Inside, her school notebooks. Her name written on the cover. It was Angie, 9 years old, gone from a quiet street, and now left to die in the woods like garbage. The autopsy delivered a second blow. Angie had not been killed on the day she vanished. She had been held captive for 9 days, starved, tortured, sexually assaulted, and then, sometime just hours before she was found, she was taken into the freezing woods, tied up, and left there alive, to die slowly from hypothermia. She froze to death. The medical examiner said it was likely she had been conscious for hours, maybe longer. That kind of cruelty broke something in the town of Saint, and people cried in the streets. Grown men couldn't speak. Mothers held their children tighter. Fathers waited outside the school, bus stop, silent and seething. Police threw everything they had at the crime scene. Every inch was combed. They found one critical clue, a partial fingerprint on the duct tape wrapped around Angie's head. It wasn't much, but it was something. They ran it through national databases. No match, not even close. Whoever had done this was clean, or careful, or lucky. And then came fear's twin brother, panic. Just 4 days after Angie's body was found, another child vanished. 10-year-old Casey Williamson disappeared from a nearby town just 10 miles away. She had asked her mom if she could visit her friend down the street. She never arrived. Police locked down the region. This time, they weren't waiting. 10 days later, Casey's body was discovered, wrapped in bed sheets, dumped like trash near St. Louis. Her cause of death? Massive blunt force trauma to the head. Investigators immediately feared the worst. Was this a serial killer? Was someone targeting young girls? But the methods were different. Angie had been tied up, tortured, and left to freeze. Casey was killed quickly and dumped. Still, police had no choice but to consider the unthinkable: 2 child murders in the same region, less than 2 weeks apart. Then came a break. Finally, detectives learned that Casey's body had been left in an area with fresh tire tracks. The treads were matched to a specific type of rental pickup truck used by a large car company. They canvassed the neighborhood with a picture of the truck, and they got lucky. A woman remembered seeing that exact vehicle parked outside her neighbor's house the day after Casey disappeared. The house belonged to a woman, her partner, and her brother. When police asked if anyone had rented the truck, they denied it. So, detectives got a warrant. What they found in the basement would chill even the most hardened investigators: traces of Casey's blood and the murder weapon. Eventually, the brother, Thomas Brooks, confessed. He said Casey had knocked on his door, looking for his nephews. He lured her inside, took her downstairs, tried to assault her. When she screamed, he hit her. Hard. Then again. He hid her body in the basement for a week, terrified by the ongoing search. When the media frenzy died down, he rented a truck and dumped her remains. Case closed, but Thomas swore he had nothing to do with Angie's murder. And investigators believed him. Too many differences. No evidence. No connections. 2 predators. 2 separate nightmares. In 1 month. The Woods had given up one secret. But the biggest question remained. Who took Angie? Who tortured her? Who left her to die in that dark forest, just a child surrounded by silence? And the scariest part? That man was still out there. Still walking free. And no one knew who he was. We're not done. The case was about to go cold. But decades later, science would do what witnesses and sketches could not. The truth would rise, years too late. Subscribe and stay locked in as we follow the trail that finally caught a killer. The death of Angie Housman should have sparked swift justice. The evidence was brutal. The crime was vicious. And the community? Begging for answers. But after the discovery in the woods, something strange happened. Everything went quiet. The police had her body. They had a fingerprint. They had details so horrifying they made headlines across the country. But they had no suspect. No name. No face. Just nothing. That fingerprint on the duct tape, it went nowhere. The national database had no matches. And so the fingerprint sat, logged, stored, waiting for a future that no one could promise. The case, meanwhile, was unraveling. Tips kept coming, but they were mostly dead ends. Psychics called in. Some claimed they'd seen Angie in visions. One even gave an exact location, a national park 25 miles away. Police didn't buy it. And honestly, they were running out of hope. But then came something weird. A prison inmate named Corey Fox contacted police. He claimed to have killed Angie along with over 10 others. He said he'd abducted her with a friend, held her captive, tried to demand a ransom, then panicked and decided to kill her. His story was dark. He described tying her to a tree, using underwear as a gag, even mentioned the forest, too detailed to ignore. Had he really done it? Detectives rushed to interview him. But the deeper they looked, the more the cracks showed. Fox claimed they'd used plastic handcuffs, but Angie had been tied with metal cuffs. He said they killed her early on, but Angie had been kept alive for 9 days. He confessed to murders he couldn't have committed, confirmed by solid alibis. Corey Fox wasn't a killer. He was a liar, a disturbed man clinging to attention. Case closed again. Another false hope crushed. And yet, something kept nagging at the detectives. Why was it so hard to catch this killer? Why no trail? Why no DNA match? And then they remembered something that hadn't made sense at the time. When Angie's body was discovered, another man was there. A guy sitting in a parked car nearby. Police talked to him. His name was Roger Lee Martin. He said he was there to hunt, but he had no gear in his car. Strange. Still, no one pressed too hard. They were overwhelmed, focused on other leads. But in 2007, a new team of detectives went back through the case files. They found Roger Martin's name, and then they dug deeper. Roger had a criminal record, a bad one. He'd been convicted of multiple sexual offenses against children. And one of those assaults? It happened near the exact area where Angie's body was found. And here's the kicker. All of those crimes happened before 1993, before Angie's death. That meant his record should have come up at the time. But it didn't. It was buried, overlooked, missed. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe it was lack of resources. Either way, a man who had preyed on children before, who had no reason to be in that forest, who had been at the scene, was let go. And now, he was gone. Detectives tracked down everything they could on Roger. They discovered he'd moved, changed addresses, slipped out of sight. They brought him in for questioning again. He denied everything, said he was just hunting, said he never even knew who Angie was. They had no physical evidence, no DNA, just a feeling. So once again he walked free. The phantom suspect had slipped away, and for years, that's all Angie had, shadows. A case no one could close, a killer no one could name. But science was catching up, and when it did, everything would change. Don't miss what comes next, because decades after her murder, a stunning twist would reopen the case, and finally, someone would answer for Angie's death. If you're still here, it means you care. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Let's keep the pressure on and keep Angie's memory alive. She deserved better. Her family deserved answers, and they were finally on their way. For years, the Angie Housman case stood still, frozen in time, much like the way she died. Detectives retired. Leads dried up. The case file collected dust. And yet, it never left anyone's mind. Not in Missouri. Not in the hearts of those who had searched the woods for her. Not in the nightmares of a community that still locked its doors tighter every November. But what no one could have predicted, what even the killer probably didn't know, was that a tiny sliver of DNA had survived, and the science to unlock its secret was catching up fast. It was 2019. 26 years had passed. The fingerprint from the duct tape still sat in evidence. So did trace DNA from the tape, her clothing, and the plastic bag found at the scene. In 1993, that DNA wasn't enough. Too degraded, too partial, useless. But now, forensic technology had evolved. Thanks to genetic genealogy, the process that had unmasked the Golden State Killer, detectives could run crime scene DNA through public genealogy databases, not just criminal ones. It wasn't a match to a name. It was a match to a family tree. And this time the DNA spoke. Working with genealogists, detectives followed the branches backward. The strand of DNA led to several relatives, then narrowed down to one possible man. A man who had flown under the radar. A man with no criminal record in 1993. a man who had once lived in Missouri, not far from Angie's home. His name was Earl Webster Cox. To most, Cox was a ghost, a name buried in sealed files. But when the police pulled his records, a dark, disturbing life unraveled. Earl Cox was a former U.S. Air Force computer technician, but in the 1980s he was court-martialed and dishonorably discharged for sexually abusing young girls. After that, he moved around. In 1989, he was arrested in Colorado for molesting another child. He pleaded guilty, but somehow he stayed out of the spotlight. Eventually, he returned to Missouri. And in 1993, around the time Angie was abducted, he was living in the St. Louis area. He matched the psychological profile. He matched the timeline. He matched the DNA. When detectives confronted Cox with the evidence, he didn't confess. He lawyered up. But prosecutors didn't need a confession. They had forensic proof that Cox's DNA was on the duct tape used to wrap Angie's face. They had him. In June 2019, Earl Webster Cox was formally charged with Angie Housman's kidnapping and murder. It had taken 26 years. But justice had finally knocked on the door. The case shocked the public all over again. How had this man slipped through? How had someone with such a horrifying past lived free for so long? And worse, was Angie his only victim? Some detectives believe she wasn't. One theory suggested Cox may have been part of a child pornography ring operating across state lines. Investigators found that he'd uploaded and distributed thousands of illicit images online. Could her abduction have been planned? Was there a network? Was someone else involved? Those questions still haunt the case today. Earl Cox never stood trial. His health deteriorated while awaiting trial in federal custody. In August 2022, he died in prison before he could be convicted. There was no courtroom drama, no verdict read aloud, no chance for Angie's family to stare him down in court, just a cold end to a monstrous life. But even in death, Cox's identity gave closure. The man who murdered Angie had a name. For 26 years, Angie's killer was a phantom, a shadow lurking in old case files. And then, science pulled him into the light. The fingerprint that led nowhere, the DNA too small to analyze, they told the truth, after all. Earl Cox had taken her, tortured her, left her to die. But he didn't win, because the world never forgot her name. Angie Housman, 9 years old, a face no one should ever forget. Technology brought a killer to justice. And her story isn't just a tragedy, it's a testament to perseverance, to progress, to the power of never giving up. If you believe that every cold case matters, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and help share Angie's voice. We may never hear her speak again, but together we can make sure she's heard. Angie Housman's story didn't end in the woods. It didn't end in 1993. It didn't end in the court system either. It lived on in every child who walked home from school under tighter watch, in every parent who clutched their little one just a second longer, and in every detective who reopened a cold file because they believed there was still hope. Even after her death, Angie created change. Following the gruesome discovery in Bush Wildlife Area, public outrage soared. Missouri lawmakers were pressured to reevaluate how missing children cases were handled. There were too many gaps, too many failures, and Angie wasn't the only one. Over the next several years, Missouri rolled out tighter child protection measures, increased statewide communication between law enforcement agencies, and pushed for better forensic preservation of evidence from crime scenes. Because back then, DNA was still an emerging science. But Angie's case showed the cost of delay. It proved what could happen when the only thing between life and death was a few lost minutes or a missed connection. But her legacy didn't just live in policy, it lived in technology. When Genealogy caught Earl Cox in 2019, Angie's name was written alongside the growing list of cases being solved decades after the fact. This wasn't just a victory for her family. It was a warning to predators everywhere. You can't hide forever. Your DNA will betray you. Your past will catch up. Your name will surface. There's another piece to Angie's story, the emotional legacy. Her teachers remember her as bright, sweet, and talkative. Her classmates never forgot her smile. She was the kind of kid who'd draw pictures for her friends and hand out hugs like candy. At home, she loved coloring, cartoons, chocolate milk. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian because animals are nicer than people. The irony of that quote cuts deep now, but it also gives us something else. Perspective. Angie wasn't just a face on a flyer or a segment on the news. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a dreamer. And because the world refused to forget her, the truth came out. Because the community refused to let her be just another cold case, justice arrived, eventually. Because technology refused to stand still, her killer's name is now history. In the years since her case was solved, countless podcasts, documentaries, articles, and YouTube creators, like this channel, have taken up Angie's story. Not just to revisit tragedy, but to remind the world. This is why we don't give up. Because somewhere out there is another family waiting, another child missing, another case unsolved. And every time we raise our voices for victims like Angie, we close that distance. We light another path. We fight back. There are two kinds of silence, the kind that hides the truth and the kind that echoes through history until it finds justice. Angie's voice was taken, but now it speaks louder than ever. Let her legacy be a call to action. If you've made it this far, thank you. You didn't just hear a story. You stood witness to a tragedy that became a movement. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment her name below. Let's flood this platform with her memory. Let's prove that Angie Housman was never just another victim. She was a light, and we're keeping it burning. Behind every cold case, there are faces the public never sees. They don't hold press conferences. They don't make headlines. They're not in the news cycle. But they keep going, year after year. Because the weight of silence never really lifts until someone makes it speak. In the case of Angie Housman, there were many who gave up hope. But more importantly, there were a few who didn't. Detective Tom Carroll was one of them. He had worked on dozens of missing children cases, but Angie stuck with him, haunted him. He never forgot the scene in the woods, never stopped thinking about what she might have gone through in those 9 days. Even after the case went cold, he checked the file every year, sometimes just to reread her school photo, sometimes to make sure her evidence was still preserved correctly. In 2001, when the community donated a $250,000 reward to reignite the search, Carroll was among the first to push it forward. We owe her that, he said. She didn't get a chance to grow up. We owe her every hour we've got left. Then there was FBI agent Michael Parker, who had a background in digital forensics. In the early 2000s, long before genetic genealogy was a buzzword, he began advocating for new testing methods to revisit cases like Angie's. At the time, the technology didn't exist to extract viable matches from such degraded DNA. But Parker kept notes, cross-referencing what samples existed with every emerging lab process being tested across the country. Years later, his early groundwork would form the basis for the genealogy process that ultimately exposed Earl Cox. He didn't get credit, but he didn't want it. When asked about Angie, all he said was, "I've got a daughter the same age. There was no way I was letting this one go." And then there was Angie's mother, Teresa. The media often painted her as broken, reclusive, silent. What they didn't see were the nights she stood on her porch, looking down the street. The hundreds of letters she sent to news stations. The countless prayers, candles, visits to the woods where Angie was found. For 26 years, Teresa never moved out of the house Angie left from. "I couldn't," she told reporters later. "What if she came home?" She left her daughter's room untouched for nearly 3 decades. Even when everyone else moved on, she stayed frozen in time. Angie's classmates became parents of their own. One of them, Lisa, now a mother of 3, helped lead the petition to rename a section of the local trail after Angie. She told City Council, she only made it halfway home. Let's make sure every other child makes it the whole way. Today, a bench sits on that trail with a plaque that reads, "In memory of Angie Housman, may every child walk in peace And then came the new generation of digital detectives, podcasters, journalists, YouTubers, bloggers. They took Angie's story, Faded and Buried, and made it viral again. They weren't constrained by bureaucracy or chain of command. They had something more powerful: reach. It was a Reddit post that first reignited interest in the case back in 2018. A true crime podcast picked it up months later, and then the dominoes began to fall. When the FBI realized people still cared, they prioritized the case again. It sounds small, but in true crime, noise matters. Sometimes justice doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts with one person who refuses to stop asking questions, who won't let the file stay closed, who lights a fire that others keep alive. Angie's case reminds us of something vital. Justice is not a moment. It's a movement. If you're part of that movement, this is your moment. Don't just watch. Don't just scroll. Comment her name. Share her face. Speak her story. Because the more we say her name, the more we remind the world that Angie mattered, that she was loved, and that monsters don't win when we never let victims be forgotten. Angie Marie Housman was only 9 years old. She loved animals. She drew pictures in class. She laughed with her friends. She asked too many questions. She wore her heart wide open. She never got to grow up. But she did something most of us never do. She changed the world. Her murder was a scar that never healed, not just for her family, but for an entire generation. Her case shaped how schools supervise children, how law enforcement handles missing persons, how forensic evidence is stored, re-examined, and respected. But more than that, Angie's story became a signal flare in the dark, a reminder that behind every cold case is a warm life lost, that the victims are never just names or case numbers. They were children, sisters, best friends, bright futures, and we owe them our voices. Angie never got to speak again, but we can. We can speak for her. We can remind the world that even the darkest stories can end with light if we keep pushing, if we never stop sharing, if we never stop demanding answers, because justice doesn't rest, and silence helps no one. This is your moment to be part of something bigger than just watching. Share this video, post her name, keep talking about Angie, and the next time you hear about a missing child, don't scroll past it. You could be the noise that makes the system move. You could be the echo that keeps the memory alive. Because if Angie taught us anything, it's this: never give up. Not on the case, not on justice, not on a little girl who only made it halfway home. Subscribe for more unsolved cases, survivor stories, and the truth that still hides in silence. Like, comment, share. Let's make sure Angie's voice never fades. Comment, justice for Angie Housman. Let's fill the internet with her name. Let's make sure she is never forgotten.